Hello, everybody. So today we're going to discuss the landscape of social responsibility and policy change. And I'm going to do it through my 3XP leadership lens. Okay. And so when I talk about social responsibility, I'm talking about the obligation that companies, businesses, organizations that they have to operate in ways that benefit um, not just themselves, but also their employees, the communities around them, the stakeholders, and society as general, right? So social responsibility, what it does, is it asks organizations to consider a very important question, right? Are the decisions we're making within our organization creating value beyond profit, performance, and compliance, right? And I know some might say, well, that's not the importance of business today. There's a lot of I'm not gonna say arguments, but debate about social responsibility. But let's look at it in the essence of policy change, right? So when we talk about policy change is the process um, of revising, improving, or creating formal rules, right? Procedures, guidelines that's going to shape your organizational behavior. So your policies influence what uh, you know people within the organization can do, what they are expected to do, and how um, you or how your organization will respond to the social, ethical, legal, and operational challenges because they're all there. Every company is going to deal with it, right? Um, so the connection between social responsibility and policy change is important because you organizations cannot just simply claim to care about fairness, equity, or sustainability, access, ethics, or community impact. A lot of organizations claim it, but it takes more than that. Their values must be built into the policy, and without the policy, your social responsibility, can it, without that policy, your social responsibility can become a statement without structure, and it will be a statement without structure, right? It sounds good, but there's no guided action. So what we did in my company, TMTSI, and with 3XP leadership is um, we integrated social responsibility, and all our policies, into the framework. In our framework, my 3XP leadership focuses on purpose, people, and process as the foundation that lays the foundation for a strong performance, right, for an organization. So when our leaders are dealing with social responsibility and policy change, they must examine all three areas very carefully, right? So let's start with purpose. So purpose asks leaders to consider why policy even exists or what larger mission it supports. So uh, a socially responsible organization don't create policies only to avoid legal problems or protect its image. It creates policies that reflect its values and responsibilities. For example, if a company may develop a policy around inclusive hiring, not simply because diversity is expected, but because the organization believes in fair access to opportunity strengthens the workforce and community. And I would tell you, I talk to a lot of organizations about that, and they're like, well, we want to be very diverse. We're diverse, diverse. And I was asking, well, what does that actually mean? Are you looking at a picture with different colors, or are you or a picture of your organization with different personalities? What does that actually look like? What does diversity actually mean, right? Um, and when I'm working with clients and people are always asking me, well, how does TMTSI look at diversity? I said, well, TMTSI is a very diverse organization to begin with. It is embedded in our thinking. It's embedded um, in our actions, in our policies. So we don't come up and say, well, how can we be diverse? Because we are naturally going to be a diverse company. We're naturally diverse, and we don't bring people in our company that don't have that ingrained in their DNA. You know, so purpose keeps policy connected to meaning. The purpose, it's going to remind our leaders it should remind leaders that policies are not just documents. They're part of your leadership tool, and they should communicate what your organization values, what it will protect, and what it expects from its employees and team members, right? So when we talk about, in like I said, 3XP leadership, we have our leaders focus on people. Policy change affects people directly. It affects everybody: customers, employees, students, clients, families, community members. You're going to all experience the impact of policy. And so as a leader, you must ask, who benefits from this policy? Who may be troubled by the policy? And possibly who's been left out of the conversation? So social responsibility requires leaders to move beyond the top-down decision-making, right? And if a policy is created without input from the people affected by it, then the policy may fail, even if its intention behind it is good. So and we all know all policies came from the top. Well, sometimes there's people. I've been with organizations before where they come out with these policies or these processes, and we'll talk about process in a minute. And I sit back and I'm looking. I'm like, well, have they ever stepped foot in a building to make sure that these processes can even happen, right? Been there, done that. So as a leader, it's good to listen to stakeholders, understand lived experiences, and identify any barriers that may not be visible at the executive level. And when I'm talking to executives, I always ask executives, and the barrier exists, right? That there's a barrier. Of course, there's one organization, I'm not going to mention their name, but the executives, I just talk to executives all the time, and I would ask them, I say, that there's a barrier between, your level in the organization and everybody else's, right? So when you announce that, hey, I'm going to be in this area, or hey, I'm coming out to visit, what do you think it's really looking like? And I used to call it the dog and pony show, right? I say everybody's putting on a dog and pony show for the execs. But what if you just showed up? It's your organization. Do you have to announce that you're coming? It's not catching them by surprise, because if they were doing what they were supposed to be doing, or if the organization is moving and this is a great organization and it's doing what it's supposed to be doing, then they would be glad to see you. And then have you actually talked to people without the fear that they can't say what it is that they really need to say, right? So I'm talking about to employees and to team members to find out what is really going on before you set some policies in place, right? When we talk about identifying barriers that may not be visible to an executive level, an organization, for example, let's say an organization, it can create a remote work policy to improve flexibility, and many of them done that. So, if the leaders don't consider employees who lack reliable technology, private workspace, or caregiving support, then the policy may unintentionally create what? The inequality. It may seem like they're discriminating against certain employees, So if you learn to be people-centered, then a people-centered leader will consider the human impact before, during, and after the policy, is put in place. So just think about that, right? So just hey, we're gonna do work from home now. Everybody can work from home, and you as a leader might think, oh, I'm doing everybody a favor because they don't have to come into work. Well, does that benefit everybody? Because just because you got 2-3 groups of people over here, you got 2 or 3 people over here, and you got one over here, and 2 or 3 people say, yeah, I would love to work from home, and I don't like coming in the office. And so you say, well, because they don't want to come in the office, we're going to make not everybody come in the office. That's not how a policy should be implemented, right? And let's talk about the process under 3XP. So process and is where social responsibility becomes operational. You know, it's not enough for leaders to just say, "Hey, we believe in fairness. Hey, we support ethical behavior." Trust me, I've heard that many times. Um, but the organization must create systems that make those values real. So process includes how your policies are written, how they're communicated, how they're implemented, how they're reviewed, and how they're enforced. Right? A social responsible policy should be clear, accessible, consistent, and practical, right? Your team members should understand that, understand what that policy means, why it matters, and how it's going to apply to their work. So process requires accountability, okay? If a policy is applied inconsistently, it's going to damage trust. And let me tell you something about trust, okay? Trust takes hours to earn, hours. It takes hours for you to earn your team members and your employees' trust. It takes seconds to lose it. Seconds. And once you lose it, now those hours to re-earn that trust is going to take days, maybe weeks, maybe even months. But again, trust is so difficult to earn. But once it's earned, understand it's easy to lose. Easy to lose, right? Inconsistency. Um, if you ignore policy violations by some people but punish others, then your policy loses credibility, right? So strong process ensures the policy change is not symbolic. It's part of your culture, part of the organization's culture, and part of the operations, right? And when purpose, people, and process are aligned, the organization is more likely to achieve stronger performance. And performance in this context isn't only about the productivity or financial results. Performance also includes the trust, building of the trust, the ethical decision making, the employee engagement, the community impact, legal compliance, and long-term organizational sustainability. So social responsibility policies can improve organizational performance because they create a clear expectation. They reduce confusion. They strengthen your culture, and they help your organization respond to change more effectively. The landscape of social responsibility is constantly changing. Organizations today are facing expectations around diversity, equity, inclusion, environmental sustainability, data privacy, employee well-being, community, engagement, artificial intelligence, um, accessibility, and ethical leadership. And that's the great thing of being a leader, especially an executive leader, or like we've been a CEO. That's the great, to me, that's the challenges of having a sustainable business or sustainable organization. And I love those challenges, right? There's some people that don't like those challenges. And I'll tell you what, you don't need to be at that level of leadership, man, because that's what you're dealing with today. And those issues are separate from your policy. They require your policy leadership, okay? And you must be willing to review outdated policies, ask those difficult questions, right? Does this policy still serve our mission? Does it reflect our current values, right? Does it support fairness and accountability? Does it help people perform, or does it just create unnecessary barriers? There's a lot of organizations that have not updated their policies in 10, 20 years. And it's crazy. It's like, we're not the same society as of 10 years ago. We're not the same society. We're definitely not the same society as 20 years ago, right? So what makes you think those policies are still effective, right? If we're updating our laws, then guess what, ladies and gentlemen, we should be updating our organizational policies. Um, you know, Policy change can be challenging because people often resist change. Humans are naturally going to resist change, right? Um, and that's because they fear losing control. Others worry about new expectations. Some may not understand why the change is necessary, but your leadership matters and all that, right? You must communicate the purpose of the policy change, involve people in the process, and make sure the organization has the systems needed to support the implementation of the policy, right? Approach policy change with intention, right? Um, It's, and the way we look at it within 3XP leadership is we look at it as our purpose gives policy direction. The people give the policy meaning. The process gives policy structure, and performance shows whether the policy is working. So your social responsibility and policy change are deeply connected. They're not separate, they're connected. Your organization should demonstrate responsibility not only by what they say, but what they formalize, what they practice, and hold themselves accountable to it, right? And policy is one of the ways that leadership becomes more visible. And it shows your employees, your team members, your stakeholders, what the organization truly values, right? So like I said, we use 3XP leadership, and policy, social responsibility and policy change is embedded in ours. They are better, our leaders are better positioned to create policies that are purposeful, people-centered, process driven, and performance focused. So, and we believe that's how organizations move from good intentions to responsible action.